What is going on, y'all? It is time to break down the Week 10 DFS slate on DraftKings. This is the Daily Destroyer DFS show, part of the Dynasty Warzone Network. As always, I'm Tyler. He's Lou. We'll start like we always do at the quarterback position. Lou, I think quarterback's pretty straightforward this week, and I think it's just going to be a continuation of last week for me. Last week I was saying I'm playing Fields no matter what. Fields, it was a great play. Pat myself on the back there. He was a smash play quarterback last week, and then he gets the Lions again. DeFleur is just great, and he's playing well, and it seems that after a year and a half, the Bears have finally figured out how to play Fields successfully. And in this soft matchup, I think it's just at 6,500, it's too hard for me to pass up. Thoughts on Fields?
Yeah, they finally raised his price, and we talked about it a little last week where he kept being under 6K, and with his rushing floor, we knew one of these weeks was going to happen. 100-yard bonus is always in the cards for him. And quarterback is a little awkward this week with Josh Allen, the injury around him. There's no Lamar Jackson on the slate. Kyler Murray is now becoming a game-time decision. So some of these high-end quarterbacks aren't even going to be useful. And then you get down to Fields. Everyone saw him put up 45 points last week. Gonna probably want to go back to him. He's been getting pretty much 20-plus fantasy points for last month. And at this point, they're facing the Lions, one of the best matchups you can have at any position. So 6,500, great price for him. He'll probably go up into the 7Ks after he gets another 25, 30 points this week.
Love to hear it, Lou. I think if I wasn't going Fields, like let's just, I feel like we at least got to chat about a couple here. I would be paying up for Mahomes, 7,900 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. You look at them, they're implied for 30 points. I think it's the most single team implied total on the week. The Jags themselves, not exactly the most imposing of defenses. I think their pass defense is 27th DVOA, which is bottom 5 here, and then 21st in yards allowed per pass. I mean, it's just a smash spot here for Mahomes, but the way that things are kind of setting up, I find myself needing that extra cash going down from Mahomes to Fields. But, if you weren't going Fields for the sake of, chatting here, how do you feel about Mahomes?
Yeah, I think price-wise, I probably won't get up to Mahomes. I think the 1,400 difference is enough to stay off of it. I think I'd be more likely to go to Tua for only 200 more. But I think if I'm not playing Fields, I'd actually go down to the other side of that game and take Trevor Lawrence, 5,400. Some people might want to go and play Case Keenum if he gets the start, or like Jacoby Brissett's right next to Trevor Lawrence too. But Lawrence is relatively safe as far as floor goes. I don't know how much of an upside he has, but in this matchup against the Chiefs, it could be a high-scoring game. He does throw the ball a lot more often than Fields. We've seen him run. Last week, he actually had 50 rushing yards.
Yeah, you can see him rush a touchdown in. It's
he had
plausible.
2 1 week.
Yeah.
So I think for 5,400, if I wasn't going with Fields, if I wanted to save the 1,000, I would end up going with Lawrence.
We'll make it quick here. I mean, before I go to your pool, just talk me into any reason you'd want to pay the backups this week. I mean, I think we might be getting backups in multiple games. Case Keenum, I think Wolford, if Stafford doesn't suit up. So, those guys are pretty cheap. Any thought or interest on those guys?
Yeah, and potentially Malik Willis. You also have, Sam Ellinger, who I don't know if we want to call him a backup, but not too much interest. Keenum, it's tough because I think it's a decent matchup against the Vikings, from a QB standpoint. He's a QB that has had plenty of experience playing in the NFL, so a little less so than when Willis and Ellinger came in, and they haven't really ever started in the NFL. At least he does have some experience, but I don't know. I think they're too close in price to Trevor Lawrence, who's pretty well established in a game that is expected to be a little more high scoring, and you have Andy Dalton at 5,500. They just seem a lot safer, so I probably won't go there.
Pool of 3 quarterbacks. Lou.
Fields, Mahomes, and Lawrence.
All right. Now is when things get a little bit more interesting here. In the past, if you've been paying attention, just to recap in case you weren't listening or paying attention, we've pretty much just been jamming in those like 6 to 6,500 running backs every week. It's just been money for us. The Ramondres, the Kenny Walkers, the Etiennes. It's been working out really well. We don't really have that option this week. I think there's really no cheap running backs that I feel really comfortable with. I mean, there's probably one that is somewhat cheap, but there's just no cheap options really at the running back position that I want to put in my lineups in cash. I think let's just talk about the one at the top that I expect everyone to play, and just talk about why you think you need to play him, and he's not a fade. 6,300, Dameon Pierce.
He just seems like he's getting so much usage, and it's not necessarily the best matchup, but it's almost like it doesn't matter the matchup. Like the Texans, this is their guy. He had 27 carries last week. He's very much a lock to get at least 15. If not, he's 20 plus carries. He doesn't have a ton of work in the passing game, but they have shown that in games that they're trailing or need to, they'll pass it to him. So he has some of that in the floor as well. But everyone that used to be around him the last few weeks have been priced up into the 7Ks. So he's just kind of the only one in the 6K range that has a full role. Tony Pollard, if Zeke were to miss, is another guy that's in that same wavelength. But I mean, I don't know, how is AJ Dillon priced higher than Dameon Pierce is so weird to me.
It's a mistake. I mean, AJ Dillon's great if you're trying to get 11 rushes for 44 yards.
If you want single digit fantasy points,
yeah, he's great for that. I mean, yeah, it is. I mean, it's bad. I mean, Dameon Pierce is like he's got one of the best workloads in the entire NFL.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a bad team. So, but I mean, still, you can't. The volume is there.
Yeah. Everyone else that has a similar workload to Pierce is at least 7,100. So you're getting some savings there. You're going to be playing some of the other guys in that range as well, but there's not a lot of ways to save this week at running back.
Okay, so let's talk about the guys at the top. I think it just makes the most sense right now because I think a lot of guys are going to be going in that direction just because obviously they're good players. Saquon Barkley, 86. Derrick Henry, 83. Let's go Nick Chubb, 81, and Dalvin Cook to 8. All the guys 8K and up. I feel like that's usually what I do anyways. What are your interests there, your thoughts, big fades, guys you're locking in?
Yeah, I mean, Barkley has an amazing matchup facing the Texans. They've given up 12 touchdowns to running backs in their 8 games. They just gave up 200 plus yards again to Derrick Henry. They're just you basically, if you're a running back playing fantasy, you want to be facing the Texans, and Saquon has a massive workload on this team. Basically, going to have 25 touches most weeks, and in a matchup where Texans just can't defend the run, 8,600 is still a decent price for Saquon. So he's probably my favorite. Derrick Henry, we know what we're getting from Derrick Henry. This is a guy who has multiple games with at least 30 carries. He's not too active in the passing game, but it doesn't matter because they want to give him the ball when they want to score touchdowns, and that's obviously great for fantasy points. He has hit the 100-yard bonus in 5 straight games.
We love that.
One of those games, he had multiple touchdowns in 3 of those games. So his ceiling is so massive, even without getting many receptions. So love Derrick Henry each and every week, but he's probably going to be relatively owned. Nick Chubb also just sort of gets a bunch of fantasy points and end zone. Pretty similar role to Henry. More people are going to be clicking on Henry, I think, which probably makes Chubb a better play. And then Dalvin Cook is all right, but I prefer the other 3 before him.
Understood. All right, let's just talk about a couple of guys that I think, we need to talk about as they're good matchups. The price seems to be there. That's going to be Alvin Kamara, 74, and Etienne, 71. 2 guys that I'm heavily considering getting into my lineup. I'm leaning Etienne's way at 71. We've just seen the workload. We've seen what he's been doing. It just looks really good. Etienne's been a great cash play ever since he got that full-time role. And then Kamara, it can be a little more hit or miss, but At the same time, he is pretty much the guy there. So, Kamara 74, Etienne 71.
To me, it's almost like if you need the 300, they're not all too different. I do probably prefer Kamara just because his spike weeks in receptions just add so many fantasy points. We've seen it a few times this year, especially with Andy Dalton, compared to when it was Winston. He only had 9 carries last week, which is somewhat concerning because he also didn't really get too many targets. But that was probably just like a little game flow thing. The Steelers are a lot easier matchup than the Ravens in that regard. Etienne's great. Since he's pretty much taken over as the number one, he has at least 27 touches in each of those 2 games.
We love to see that.
He's got a massive role, and he's just been hitting the top end in fantasy points as well. He still hasn't hit 30, but he's gotten in that 29 a couple times here. So Etienne, I really like that game matchup against the Chiefs, where they do give up a decent amount of points to running backs. They have they're second worst at giving up fantasy points to running backs. So similar in a sense to the Saquon matchup, where I expect Etienne with his role to be the guy that they're going to try to score touchdowns with. We've seen Kamara; he either gets 4 to 6 touchdowns, or he gets nothing. So. Yeah, it's one of those things where I think if you need the 300, then I'm perfectly fine with going to Etienne.
And you might in this one because things are tight. Yeah. Talk about 2 other guys. I mean, one other guy. One at a time. I think it makes sense here. Devin Singletary, 56. He's the guy that I've kind of am forced to go to. I don't know if I love the play, but I think I'm able to talk myself into it with, Josh Allen. Part of the reason, not only do the Bills throw a lot, but the reason we're not really attracted to or are playing Bills running backs is because we know Josh Allen can run. He's going to do it on his feet. He can run in touchdowns on the goal line. He's just a dynamic, elite quarterback. But Case Keenum is anything but that. He's just going to be a pocket passer that can throw. So there, it gets to a point where I'm looking at the matchup itself, Buffalo, Minnesota. I look at the Vikings and it's nothing that is scary on the Vikings side of the ball in terms of their defense against the run or the pass. And Case Keenum's not running, so 5,600. I think talking myself into Singletary is pretty easy to do. I also am kind of there out of necessity, but at the same time, it makes sense. Singletary, 56.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to needing money and under 6K, there's not much down here. You can sort of talk into what you were saying basically on why Singletary might get more work this week. He has had a few games with more than 15 carries on the year. So I think what's interesting to me about the play is maybe he just gets a little more dump offs with Keenum, and he's the pass catching running back as well. So I could see it. I think it's more like if you need that price, 5,600. Everyone around him, like Eno, hasn't looked all that great. Melvin Gordon doesn't get a ton of work. Then you have mostly backups around there. The only other guy near there is David Montgomery, who he's going to get you 15 touches, but he hasn't really done all that much with them.
And Herbert just looks better. It's just uninspiring.
Yeah. Right, and you're not going to play Herbert over him. Mostert, interesting. He's another guy who is probably going to get 15 touches, but there's so many other players on that team that they like to score touchdowns with. It's kind of tough, but he's kind of interesting. But even he's 6,100, so saving the 500 for Singletary. Would you consider a guy who started the season probably $3,000 higher, probably Najee Harris? He is getting targets. He's pretty much getting you 12 points each game. Not really going to hit 20 points. Not going to get you 5 points, but he's 5,500 in an okay matchup. But do you have any interest in him, or do you think Warren is just going to take up take too much away.
And it's less to do with Warren and me. Just like they're a pass heavy team. They're not great at passing. Warren's they've been talking publicly about Warren getting more play, and Najee just hasn't looked good. You can blame the Liz Frank injury. You can blame the bad offensive line, the fact that Big Ben Roethlisberger's there anymore. It might be all three of those, but I don't know, man. I don't think there's a world where you can talk me into playing Najee Harris for my own money. That's just bottom line, man. I think I think another conversation point is if Zeke doesn't go, Pollard. Yeah. Zeke. Apparently Jerry Jones said he expects him to suit up, but it sounds more like from the beat writers that he's more of a game time decision. We don't really know. Pollard at 65, in my opinion, is an insta play though, if Zeke is out. So I think I'm not really playing Zeke or Pollard right now, but if Zeke is declared out, I think getting Pollard and Pearson there is a really good way to save money and make me feel confident at that position that I wasn't as much before at the price.
Yeah, I think I probably still prefer Pierce to Pollard.
No, I'm playing both of them. I'm playing both of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'd probably prefer Pierce too, but I mean, I'm playing both of them quite comfortably. I'm saying.
Yeah, and I was building some teams that I was landing in that 6,500 to 6,800 range, and I was like, well, if Zeke's in, I don't know if I want to play Pollard because I feel like Zeke being in means he's just going to take touchdowns, even if Pollard puts up some other stats. But yeah, I like Pollard there in that case as well.
Let's move along here, man. Pool of 5 running backs.
Yeah, so for me, it's going to be Saquon, Kamara, Etienne, Pierce, and I'll say Pollard for the 5th one.
Wide receivers. I mean, for me, the best plays are at the top here. Let's just talk about those. I'm going to leave Diggs out just because I think with Keenan behind there, I'm not interested in it in cash. Feel free to rebuttal if you want to here. But Tyreek 91, I expect to be very popular. Cooper Kupp 9K, probably not going to play him for the same situation unless Stafford shoots up. Justin Jefferson 88, Devontae Adams 87. Let's throw in Hopkins too at 8K. So 8K and up, like we usually do, the expensive wide receivers. Your thoughts on these?
Yeah, it's a little tough this week to get up to them. There's not a ton of in the past, as you had mentioned before. Like there's usually 3 or 4 running backs in that 65 and down range that we've been able to play. This week we're paying a little higher for running backs, which means we're not able to afford too many of these high end wide receivers. But for me, I think Tyreek is probably my one. Not too surprisingly, he's just been smashing this year. Cooper Kupp has issues around who's his quarterback going to be this week. We're not sure if it's Walford. Is he going to feed Kupp the same way that Stafford has? I do like Justin Jefferson up here. Devontae Adams, the target tree there with Waller and Renfro out.
Could be a good play.
Yeah, I mean we saw it last week with Adams.
Slate breaker. Yeah. You needed Fields or DA. And if you weren't playing against him, good luck.
I'm not gonna play Diggs. I don't think at all. It's a good matchup. I mean, it's tough because it's a revenge game for Diggs. So for me, I think Diggs is a guy I'm probably not playing too much of. Hopkins is all right as well, but there's the concern that Kyler might not be playing his game time decision as well. So for me, I think it's Tyreek, Adams, and Jefferson, probably my top 3.
Okay. Question in the chat, Eric. What do you think about Swift at 6,400? I think in tournaments, he's a fine play. I think it's kind of a cop-out thing to say. I just have really concerns about his workload and his opportunity. We've seen them use Jamal Williams pretty consistently around the red zone, around the end zone and whatnot. And then last year that was Swift. So I think there's some really concerns around him being able to score touchdowns. We know he has the burst. We know he's going to have some long plays at times. We know he's going to be used in the pass game. But at 6,400 in cash, there's a world that he leaves this game with 12 touches. Still on the mend, in my opinion. So I'm not wild about playing him in cash, but he's definitely not like a bad play in tournaments. Lou, your thoughts?
Yeah, and he's gonna have less than 12 touches. He's only had 12 touches week 1, but I feel like he's not 100%, and
I agree. I
they're
agree.
sort of like
I
easing
agree.
him in. As you mentioned, like the upside, and when you're comparing to running backs in that range, he's gonna have a lot less touches. Also, likelihood of scoring touchdowns is a lot lower, and that's where you're going to make up a lot of your fantasy points. So, yeah, I don't think I can do Swift yet.
All right, rest of these wide receivers. I think the two to talk about as we move down from that, naturally from that top tier, that's going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown at 29, and that's going to be Olave. Sorry, that's 29 at 69, and then Olave at 68, just about the same price. We both know the target tree is there. We know that they're the number one guy there. They're going to get the volume. I think a lot of people are going to be interested in Amon-Ra St. Brown at 69 and Olave at 68 is a way to kind of save some money at wide receiver. Your thoughts on these two?
Yeah, they're both great. I think if you don't play both of them, choosing between them is really difficult. Another guy here with St. Brown compared to like what we were just talking about with Swift is how many targets is he going to get that are worth touchdowns or big plays? Like he does get a lot of targets. He has a big portion of the target tree there, so the floor is pretty good on St. Brown. I feel like Olave's ceiling is probably higher. He's the number one wide receiver there. Steelers, this matchup is really good for Olave. Steelers are the worst defense against wide receivers for fantasy. Um, both of them are likely to get 6 to 8 receptions in this game. One of them, if not both of them, is probably going to hit the 100-yard bonus. So they're both really great plays. I'm going to keep going back and forth on them this week. I think as of now, I have a slight lean to Olave, though.
I'll lean on Ross St. Brown. Maybe I'm a homer, but I would. But they're both great plays again. I mean, there's really not a lot in between that I want to talk about. One guy that I've interest in, I guess, if we're talking about in between range or that range, Jalen Waddle. He's currently in my cash lineup as of now. I think it's more of just like I can't afford Tyreek, so I'm going to Waddle. That's really all that comes down to. But I also, it's 76 to 91. Like, that's a lot of money that I'm able to use elsewhere. I don't have to play two cheap wide receivers anymore. I'm able to get Waddle in there. We know the upside's there. We know the volume's there. Your thoughts on Waddle 76 before maybe we move down to some of these cheaper guys?
Yeah, Waddle now seems like the guy for touchdowns that Tua is favoring. So I think 7,600, it's getting up there now, and it's not easy. Usually in the past few weeks, the cheat code has been play Tua with both of these guys, but at this point, it's really hard to fit all three. So almost impossible, really. But for me, I think if you're trying to get exposure to this game, Waddle's not a bad way to do it. Like, he's got a pretty good floor. Probably going to get like 5 for 70 is probably a decent floor. 7,600, a little pricier. Like, I don't think I necessarily favor him versus these other two guys that are 700-800 cheaper though. I do understand the point of like with this game, but the thing with Waddle is he's only really gone off in games that the entire Dolphins offense has gone off. So in games that they do poorer and they haven't gotten 20 points is when he's had his bad weeks. That makes sense, right? But his big games are when they really go off. And against the Browns, I could see this game being a little lower scoring than maybe some of these other weeks that they've had. So I don't know. I think he's fine, but I would just go with the savings to those other two.
Yeah, I guess like for me, the Dolphins, like this game's at 49.5. Dolphins are implied to almost score 4 touchdowns. I think things could get out of hand. I mean, Browns' run defense is 30th DVOA. Their pass defense is 18th. I guess I just I don't know. I guess I don't know if I'm betting the under, but I don't expect this to be as low scoring perhaps as you do. Any other wide receivers you want to talk about before we go into the cheaper range of wide receivers who we're paying down for?
Yeah, Amari Cooper is one that's kind of interesting in that game as well. I think he'll get a decent amount of ownership. He's had a pretty good run here of games, and Miami defense has just been giving up a lot of fantasy
Yes,
points to wide
yes, they
receivers.
have. Yes, they have.
So my concern in the game is: are they going to just run it with Chubb and try to like control the game, or are they going to pass it? And I think Cooper is probably the one where if this game does get out of hand, I don't know, like Waddle with Cooper together is probably gonna go off together. They have some good correlation there. He's had what 3 games over 100 yards now. So his upside's still there. I don't really love anyone else in that range. Alan Lazard's 6,100
It's too
though.
expensive. I wish he was 55.
Yeah, I mean he's more of a cash play. Like he's probably gonna get you somewhere between like 12 to 16 fantasy points. Without Dubs there too. So I was hoping he was in the 5Ks as well. He's 6,100. It's probably too pricey because it's above Juju and Kirk, who are in a much better game environment for it. So, yeah, I don't really love anyone else there in the 6K range, though.
Great. Let's move down to the cheap wide receivers. I'll turn this one to you, Lou. You're looking at the cheap range, let's say 5K or under, just so I can talk about Pickens later. 5K or under, cheap wide receivers, Lou. Where you at?
Yeah, this like 4 to 4,500 range is really interesting this week. Mecole Hardman is going to be out. He was originally someone that I was looking at that was going to sort of jam in, but now MVS is 4,100. Somewhat interesting. I don't know how good of a cash play he is though. For cash, I'll do like Donovan Peoples-Jones. One thing about Amari Cooper is he doesn't play as well on the road, and maybe that means that it's better for Peoples-Jones. But Peoples-Jones has 5 straight games with over 50 receiving
He's
yards.
2x in his salary. He's going to 2x his salary. We know that.
So he's only 4,300. He's pretty much a lock to get you exactly 12.1 fantasy points because that's just what he does each week. But yeah, I think he's a pretty good play. Similar to Cooper, he has a good matchup against the Miami secondary that isn't all that great this year. Zay Jones is 4,400 against the Chiefs. That's also a good matchup if you want for cash. Like he's pretty safe to get like 8 to 12 points. And then Mac Hollins, who of those guys probably has the highest ceiling, but now
Agreed.
his floor has improved because Renfro and Waller are out. If Carr's throwing to anyone that's not Adams, it's probably going to be Hollins. If he's trying to throw it deep, we've seen Hollins have a couple spike games here. He had that one game when he had all of the opportunities. He went 8, 158, and 1. So we know he has the upside. His downside and floor is a lot lower than those other guys, but I think I'd probably rank them Peoples-Jones, Hollins, and then Zay third.
I don't have a lot to add there. I like Pickens this week, but he's just not fitting at 5K. I think they're really comfortable with Pickens as a starting wide receiver. That's why part of the reason they moved Claypool. So I like Pickens, but I think it just can't fit him. I don't have much to add. I agree with you in your cheap wide receiver assessment. Lou, pool of 5 wide receivers.
Yeah, I'll say Tyreek, Amon-Ra, Olave, Peoples-Jones, and Kirk.
Like Kirk. Let's go to tight end. I mean, it's really Travis Kelce or nothing. So
Yeah,
I mean, it's like Travis Kelce
he's
or we're
projected
punting.
like 10 more fantasy points than any other
Exactly.
tight end on the slate.
It's basically like Travis Kelce or you pick your punt. Let's just talk through Kelce real quick. What are your thoughts here? I can't fit him. I'd love to, but I can't do it. But your thoughts on Kelce?
Yeah, this is almost the wouldn't you rather play Kelce than Waddle? I think he's not necessarily safer than Waddle, but I think he potentially has more upside because he's like the only guy that Mahomes is throwing to. Mahomes has back weeks over 400 yards, and we know Kelce can have 802 or 4. He had 4 touchdowns earlier in the season, so Kelsey's just far and away better than any other tight end on the slate. But as you mentioned, it's hard to fit him, and 7,800 for a tight end you almost have to play him in 2 tight end builds, and he's like your flex option instead of playing someone like Waddle or one of the running backs in that range. Besides him, it's almost like go all the way down. Hawkinson looked all right, but I mean, 5,300, he's still got like on a new team. Buffalo is decent against tight ends as well. So I pretty much would just go all the way down, sub 4K. Schultz at 3,800 is interesting. I think my favorite might be Greg Dulcich, who
Yeah, he's been on fire,
just been
man.
popping.
Yeah.
He's 3,400 against the Titans. And then Foster Moreau, similar to what we were saying about Matt Collins. They're just the target tree is shrinking in Vegas. And we've seen it the last few weeks. Like he's got at least 5 targets in 3 straight weeks. He hasn't really been hitting any sort of upside though. Like he has gotten any touchdowns this year.
It's a punt.
Yeah, but he's getting like 3 for 30. And it's just like kind of boring.
But
Dulcich is more exciting.
Exactly. It's like 30-yard touchdowns like catch and runs happen with Dulcich. With Moreau, not so much.
Yeah, Moreau's safe to get you like 6 fantasy points, but is he going to get you 15? Yeah, maybe he'll fall into the end zone or something. But
yep.
I do think that like Jacobs and Adams are going to take up a lot of the fantasy point tree on that team. And I don't know, they're facing the Colts. Like both those teams are kind of starting to give up on their season. Colts
say the least about the Colts.
But that's one thing I didn't talk about at running back. But I mean, Jonathan Taylor is only 7,500, and I don't know, people probably already forgot about him, but he's getting a ton of touches. So that game's just kind of gross, I think, in general.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. Is there any other tight ends you really want to talk about? I think if I had to bring one up, Lou, it would be Dalton Schultz at 38. Like, I probably aren't. I need the money, but I think there's like there's something interesting to say at least about the Cowboys Packers game. Like, 44-point total, not great, but Packers are implied at 24. I think there's like, if you're going with like some DAC stacks and tournaments, could go to Schultz. I guess like it's me sort of grasping at straws here to try to talk about a tight end outside of what we've said, but I don't mind Schultz.
Yeah, I think Schultz is pretty decent. Evan Ingram is also all right, 3,300. Like everyone's gonna be on the other 2 plays, but you do something like, man, if you're doing like Mahomes, you might want to go with Ingram instead of Kelsey, or maybe you just play both. Or if you're doing one of those, like Lawrence with Ingram and Kirk is already a pretty cheap stack, but Ingram's all right. Like we've seen he can get you 5-6 catches for 50 to 70 yards. So I think he's okay as well, but I'm not really looking to pay too much for a tight end this week.
Pool of 3 tight ends, Lou. Let's close things out here.
Kelsey, Dulcich, and Moreau.
Going to defense, special teams. I mean, with Case Keenum playing, like I think the Vikings at 2,200 is just like it's not even that I like the Vikings. It's just like I can't afford to pay for a defense that's over 2,500 this week with how I'm building things. So I'm just clicking on the Vikings. It's also kind of like in case something does happen to the Vikings defense, it's kind of like a block because I expect everyone to just be jamming in the Vikings defense anyways. So I really don't have a ton to talk about outside of that. I mean, I'm sure the Cardinals, if you find yourself with an extra 500 because of Stafford likely being out or could be an out, but I don't know. Yeah, it's Vikings pretty much. I'm just clicking the Vikings because I need the money. I don't really have a lot more to say.
Yeah, I thought that initially the Colts were somewhat interesting with the injuries on the Raiders, but I think if you pay a little more up to the Cardinals, if they're facing Wofford, the Rams in general just don't score many points, real life points, and the Cardinals defense has been all right. They have a decent amount of sacks. They have 5 defensive touchdowns on the year. So whatever they're doing is working as far as trying to get touchdowns from the defense. So whether that's pinning people close to the end zone and makes it a little harder to get out of there. But I think if I pay up from Vikings, it would be to the Cardinals.
Fair. That does it for Week 10 slate, DraftKings main slate. Mostly cash lineups here. Final thoughts on the week, Lou?
I think that it's a little weird of a week. It's kind of hard to fit players. Follow the injuries, especially on a lot of quarterback injuries this week heading into Sunday. So make sure you check those out because they're going to change up a lot of the decisions you make, especially when it comes to that the Josh Allen news, Stafford, Kyler Murray. If Kyler Murray's out, that game's going to be so gross. But
Yep.
should be a lot.
All right, Lou, where can I find you on Twitter? Where can I find the work?
At Lucky_Ludog. I work at Lucky Trader. I do crypto NFT stuff for them and DraftKings Rainmakers content.
You can find me at FF Tyler O. That's all we have today, folks. Don't forget, tell somebody you love them. Later.